Welcome to the Monopoly Mindset, the podcast where we uncover the strategies to build your real estate portfolio one property at a time.
We're your hosts, Tyler and Tommy, here to share our story of playing real-life Monopoly.
Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned investor, this is your go-to resource for mastering the real estate game.
So grab your board, roll the dice, and let's buy Boardwalk together. Welcome back to the Monopoly Mindset podcast, episode number 2. We're coming off a pretty good weekend. We got an Eagles win in the first round of the playoffs.
Go Birds, baby.
Yeah, even though it's a little sloppy, wins all that counts. But if you haven't seen our first episode, we pretty much just talked about what this podcast is going to be about, which is real estate investing. And today we're going to basically go over some of the very high level benefits of real estate. So if you're completely new to real estate investing, this is a really good place to start. It's going to be very basic and go over some of the core foundational benefits. And if you know a little bit about real estate or already own some rentals, then you might know a lot of this stuff, but maybe there's some tips that you can pick up. So Tommy, what do you think? What are some of the benefits that you've seen from real estate, or some of the reasons that you chose real estate investing?
I think one of the craziest statistics is that 90% of millionaires get there through some form of real estate investing. And once you understand that, or have a goal of wanting to become a millionaire, and you realize that most people that have gotten there have done it through real estate, that's been a huge key for me wanting, I have a goal of being a millionaire one day, not there yet, but I know real estate investing is going to be the thing that gets me there. And that's why I'm investing in real estate.
Yeah, I think, we can talk about risk on a money perspective, but the thing that I like about it is it's not risky in the fact that it's literally worked through all of human history, right? There's books out there from whatever 2,000 or 3,000 years ago that talk about people renting out farmland to other people, and personally, I don't want to try and create a startup or an app or something new that's never been done before. Real estate's just been done, and you don't really have to create anything on your own. You just have to follow a a simple process. Really, it really is pretty simple. Buy cheap and sell high, right? So yeah, I mean it's tried and true.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost 3 different ways to invest, right? Like you can invest with the traditional investment portfolio through stocks and bonds and whatnot. Second way is really through real estate, and then the third way is kind of if you want to buy a business or own a business, start your own business and grow that. And in my opinion, real estate is a business in a way, and to your point, it's a little bit simpler. As long as you always do the right thing and repair, try to be proactive about your properties and take good care of them, it can be a very simple way to invest.
Yeah, but I don't want to mistake simple for easy, right? Simple that it's not very complex, but it's not easy by any means. It is hard, and
Yeah,
we'll
I
kind of
mean,
get there.
if you know me at all, you know that I'm obsessed with the Eagles. So Ty even bringing them up is understating maybe how much I watch them or pay attention. I'm getting ready for the kickoff of the playoff game this weekend at 4:30, I believe it was, and I get a phone call. The games always start 5 minutes late due to commercials. Get a phone call at 4:35 that a pipe burst at one of my properties, and that was not maybe the call that I wanted to get right before the Eagles game, with how eager I was to watch that. But I had a quick conversation with my property manager. We got a contractor up there, and luckily for me, it was not nearly as bad as it could have been. So those are some of the things that you can potentially deal with in owning real estate. It's not always all glamour, and it's not always super easy. But again, called the contractor right away, got there, was able to get everything repaired and fixed pretty quickly. So there are times in real estate where you have to answer an unfortunate phone call, but it's not something that should scare you away from it completely, because a lot of things can be repaired and they're not super expensive to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of the media out there, like entrepreneurship, podcasts or whatever, social media, does glamorize entrepreneurship a lot, and we want to be very realistic of the work that goes into it. So we'll get to some of the cons at the end. But if you're first getting into real estate and you do like any research at all, there's pretty much unanimously like four economic benefits to real estate that everybody talks about. It's a very simple concept. But the first one would, well, all four would be cash flow, appreciation, loan pay down, and tax benefits. So those are the four benefits of buying long-term rentals. We're not really talking about flipping or any, wholesaling, any short-term, like those are more income producing jobs. But yeah, basically cash flow would be the money that you bring in every single month. So it's essentially your rent minus your mortgage, and then that's a very basic calculation, but you want to set some money aside for repairs, blah 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 blah. So that you might have $200 coming in every single month for a property. Appreciation is going to be how much your property goes up in value over time. That's pretty obvious. Loan pay down is just how much principal you're getting every single month from your mortgage. So obviously some of your mortgage goes to interest, assuming that you have a mortgage, and some of your payment goes to loan pay down. And that loan pay down, obviously, when you sell, you're gonna, see those benefits. And then tax deductions. Honestly, I haven't really seen too many benefits of tax deductions yet, just kind of starting out. But one thing that I know pretty much all real estate investors will use, it's called depreciation. And when you buy a truck in business, you can write that off as an expense because everybody knows that over time the truck's value goes down. In real estate, there's this I think it's really weird, but it's kind of a loophole that you can actually write a property off. You take the value that you purchased it and you divide that by 27.5 years, and you can write that amount off every single year. So if you buy a place for 100 grand, divide that by 27.5, you can write off, say, like 3 grand a year. But the weird part is that the value of the property is actually going up over time. Whereas most things in business, you're writing it off because the value is going down. So I find that kind of like a cheat code in real estate almost, and that kind of it allows you to grow and defer taxes. I don't know. Have you really like experienced huge tax benefits so far?
I think a lot of the tax benefits start to come when you're an investor that maybe starts to switch to full time, and you're taking some of your income from that cash flow, and you're really like say if you make 50,000 or 100,000 in cash flow, and then you're supplementing that off with depreciation or other tax benefits. It can make it look like you made less income on paper, so you pay less taxes there. With you and I being like our W-2 jobs, there's not many ways to really subtract the money that we've made through the tax benefits. I believe you might get lucky, Ty, now owning an Airbnb. I think there's certain ways if you manage it yourself, which actually I don't think you're going to, so you might not get those benefits. But if you manage an Airbnb by yourself, I believe there's an additional tax loophole that you can take advantage of. But to answer your question, no. But just to touch on some of those topics as well, like I think cash flow, what the beautiful thing about it is again, like in your example, say you have a property and say you bought a duplex in today's world because a single family rental is not working as well, just being one unit. But say your mortgage is $2,000 a month and you're bringing in, let's say $2,500 a month, and you have other expenses that you're saving towards. But let's say you have like $100 in cash flow. It's not a ton of money, and that's through one property. And then you say you keep growing, and now in a couple of years you have 5, 6, 7 properties. That cash flow might go from $100 to $500 to $1,000 a month. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about real estate is trying to get that cash flow to raise up and pay for certain expenses. Like if you do get a new car or a new truck or something along those lines, using that additional cash flow to kind of help your balance sheet from a personal financing perspective, I think is one of the really cool things about real estate, as well as the appreciation. A property, if you bought it for $200,000, is typically going to go up at 4%. And I know you touched on this in the previous episode, but you're going to put down 10% of that, or 20%, 5%, depending on how you're purchasing the property. So, using an example of 5% down for a $200,000 house, that's what, you're better at math than me, but 10 grand? Or
Yeah.
all right, so you're putting 10 grand down, but you have a $200,000 house that's appreciating at 4%. So you're almost making another 8 grand every year on that property.
Yeah,
Um,
kind of an easier way to think about it is if you put down 20% on a $100,000 property, in order to
yeah,
double, in order to double your money, that property doesn't need to sell for 200. It only needs to sell for 120, right? So it only needs to go up in value the amount that you put down. Now, of course, we're not including like realtor costs and closing costs, and there are costs. So when you sell for 120, you're not seeing all 120. But let's just for an example, say you do. You put down 20 grand, you have a mortgage for 80. It only needs to sell for 120 because then 120 minus 80 is 40. You just double your money. So in terms of like an ROI, again with leverage, that's to me what one of the things that makes real estate so powerful.
yeah. I think
Um,
people don't always see that. They're like, oh, I bought a house, but they forget that the house is then going to go up. Like on average, it's 4%. In the last couple of years, it's been closer to like 5 or 6%, in certain markets. But, you're like, oh, well, I would rather put that money in the stock market and get 10, which is theoretically fine, but you're guaranteed almost 4 from a real estate perspective. So I think that's another really key factor. And then to your point, you're saying double your money, but not only is that house appreciating, then you get into the loan pay down and you're paying a lot more interest up front. But if you hold a property for 3, 4, 5 years, now you're really starting to attack that principal, and now your principal is going down. So in your example, that 80K, maybe 10K at 5 years, you probably had 20K of loan pay down. So you might own that for 60. Now you sell that property and it's not worth 120 because you held it longer. It's like 130, 140. So you almost make 80 grand when you do decide to sell that property. And if you live there first for 2 out of 5 years, you have to pay no tax on that 80 grand that you made, or you can 1031 exchange it into a bigger property and still pay no tax. So there's a lot of beautiful ways to not pay taxes in real estate, and those get to more of the tax benefits that I think are more likely to be seen. And those are things that I have taken advantage of. I did sell a property, and I sold both of my primary residences, and I didn't have to pay tax on them because of living there for 2 out of 5 years.
yeah, and a lot of the tax advantages they kind of go towards entrepreneurship or business in general, not just specifically real estate. I listened to one book. I forget. I think it was Robert Kiyosaki's CPA has a book that's like very technical in taxes. But one concept that he talked about that was kind of like shocking to me was that the government wants you to grow your business because they
Yeah,
they will get their taxes and all these like tax write-off, 1031
yeah,
exchange, all of these like tax things that we talk about, they're deferring taxes. You're not paying your taxes. You're just pushing it off till a later date, unless you die, and then you can pass it on to your family tax free. Not
which is
not
also
tax advice,
insane.
but yeah. But so
Yeah,
anyway, the government wants you to grow your business because if you're bringing in $1,000 a year, let's say they get $300, right? They'd rather you be $1 billion company that owes them now $300 million a year. So they essentially in business allow you to just keep deferring the taxes so that you can grow. Whereas a W-2, right? Like you can't buy anything with your money's taxed as soon as you get it. It comes out of your paycheck. You have no control over that. But in business and real estate, you can basically take 100% of your income and grow. And then there will come a time where you do have to pay those taxes, and typically that's when I think when you're in more of a settle down mindset and stop growing as much. But yeah, it's important to know
But
that it's
even then,
different.
you just pick a better property and 1031 exchange into that, and then you own that till you die, and then you pass that down to another generation tax free. So,
Right. I mean, I've heard stories of people that, they buy a property for 100 grand. And a 1031 exchange, by the way, is basically just you sell a property. It has to be, well, yeah, this could be any investment. But in real estate, you sell a property. Normally, you'd have to pay the gains on that property. So if you made 20 grand, you're gonna have to pay taxes on 20 grand. If you take that entire sale instead and move it into a more expensive property, again, the taxes are deferred now onto that next property. So I've heard of people that, they buy a property for 100, they sell it, they buy a place for 200. A couple years later, they sell it, buy a place for 400, and so on and so on and so on until their 30 years have gone by. They own a 100-unit apartment building worth, I don't know, $20 million, and they've never paid a dime of tax on it because they've 1031 exchanged their way, like all the way up to that property.
so moving on, one of my favorite debates that Ty and I have had for a long time is real estate versus 401k. And it's definitely a very unique debate. It took me a long time to really realize what a 401k was and how it worked. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with the 401k. They're probably the number one way that I'd say, what, 70% of America retires. I don't know if that's an accurate stat. I can get fact
Yeah,
checked, but it's got to be a very high percentage of savings for most people, regardless of what the statistic is. And the 401k is great. In my opinion, a 401k is going to help you when you're 60 years old, right? Because you can't touch it until you're 59 and a half. So you're going to be putting your money into a 401k to retire at 60 to 65, which again is completely fine. But I'm 31 right now. I enjoy what I do, but I don't want to be doing it for the next 29 years. I would much rather pursue a different investment portfolio. And I think that's what makes me love real estate so much. It's not get rich quick or it's not, retire in 10 days. But I know that from a 29-year timeline of investing in my 401k, the timeline of investing into real estate might cut that in half. So maybe in 15 years at the age of 46, I'll be in a much better path to hit some sort of retirement and then kind of, I've done well and I have invested in my 401k as well. So I kind of look at it as like, what can I get to at 46 to then take me to 59 and a half where I can touch into my 401k.
yeah, and you say debate, but I definitely don't want to portray that people have to choose one or the other.
Very true.
Like I would always recommend to do 401k, like especially if you're getting a match, just take the free money if you only have to put in 6% or whatever to get like 100% match. But it depends how fast you want to grow in real estate, right? Like if you want to grow as fast as you possibly can, but be more on the risk side, then you probably aren't investing in a 401k. I personally like, the combination of both of still investing heavy in my 401k and then buying real estate with whatever money's left over. And then at the same time, I have this chunk of 401k, and you would never want to touch it before the 59 and a half marker. You'd pay penalties on it if you take it out. However, it is kind of in the back of my mind that if something goes really south, like my absolute worst case scenario is I do have this 401k fund that I could potentially take, or not even do a withdrawal. You can do a loan and it's penalty free and you have to pay it back, and you're paying it back with interest to yourself. But my point is you don't have to choose between the two. You can invest in both.
I mean, I think again, what we talked about last week is finances and investing and retirement is all kind of taboo. It's something that people aren't talking about, and it's something that they really should talk about because once you look at the 401k, I mean, the main goal is, I think, at least in my mind, is to get to $1 million, right? You want to have $1 million in your 401k so you can hit some type of retirement, or at least that was always my goal. And then when you do the math of like what a 401k really is, if I get to 60 and I want to pull from my 401k, you get into the 4% rule. And for those people that don't know what the 4% rule is, all right, great, got $1 million. I'm 60 years old. I'm going to retire. How do I do it? You pull 4% of that $1 million for the rest of your life. And that's the tried and true, calculation of, if you pull from it, you're never going to lose that $1 million. It's kind of always going to be there, in
It
the
will
up
always
markets.
continue to grow. So, if you live for another 40 years, which when we're 100, that might be young, but
Yeah,
yeah, that 4% guarantees that you'll never run out of money, essentially.
essentially, yeah. And so doing that, if you do the math though, $1 million times 4%, you're living off $40,000 a year, which again, by the time we're 60, $40,000 is going to be like living on $10,000 a month. It's going to be almost dirt cheap, which, so maybe $1 million isn't the bar anymore. Maybe you want to get to 2 million and then you're living on $80,000 based off the 4% rule projections. So to me, where I got is, I was lucky to get a lot of money into my 401k. I'm just saying, I think a lot of people should do some of these calculations and realize, hey, I only want $2 million in my 401k. And once you get that at, let's say you're 30 or 35 or 40 and you get X in there, there's a ton of calculators out there. I use Dave Ramsey's calculators all the time to say, okay, I have X in my 401k. Once I hit 60, what is that number going to be? Okay, I'm comfortable with that number. I'm going to switch, still do up to the match, but not put maybe over the match. And I'm going to save some of that money and try to invest it in real estate, where I can try to come up with a way where I can retire at 45 or 50 and still kind of beat that 401k retirement at the age of 60.
Yeah, I think your point there is that $1 million is not what it used to be, and 40 grand, especially in 40 years or 30 years for us, 40 grand is not a ton of money to live on per year to retire, at least to do what you want to do in retirement and travel and things like that. But yeah, and I think, again, one of the reasons that real estate is better is because your potential return is just, it's essentially infinitely greater than the 401k. So with the 401k, the national average of return, or of just the S&P 500, assuming that you're buying just like large mutual funds or ETFs, is 10.13% since 1957. So almost 80 years, you can basically guarantee that you're going to get 10%, and then compounded over time. Again, it's a solid return. But with real estate, again, they're not comparable in the fact that 401k is completely passive. You can set it and never, basically forget it for 30 years. It's going to require maybe like 2 hours of your time per year to like adjust your holdings. But real estate it's a business and a job, and it takes work. So I'll just say that caveat. But the potential is infinitely better. So let's just take, going back to the four benefits again, a simple example. Let's just say that you put down $20,000 for a property and you cash flow $2,000 a year. So around $200 a month or whatever, a little less. There's your 10% right there, right? You put down 20, you're getting 2,000 a year. There's your 10%. But then you factor in the loan pay down, the appreciation, and the tax benefits. And again, you don't really see those things until you sell or refinance, etc. But now you're looking at more like 20%, right? Let's just say appreciation and loan pay down give you an extra 5% a year. Right there, you doubled your return essentially versus the 401k. And when you double your return every year for 30 years, your money's not just doubled at retirement. It's like 20 times the amount, because that's just the way that the compound interest math works. And I'm making up the 20 times, but it is, you're going to have a significantly more money if you can double your returns, especially early.
Yeah, and again, I'm still using $1 million as that trademark because I feel like everybody wants to be a millionaire. But if you save up and put all your money into a 401k to live off the 4%, that's roughly like $3,300 a month. Where like in your example with one rental, maybe you're getting $200 a month. And so whatever that percentage is off of 3,300, like you can keep stacking those $200 deals and then get a $400. And like as you grow, like the goal in my opinion is if you can get to $3,000 a month in monthly cash flow, that's significantly better than, and it can be done sooner and quicker than waiting until you're 60 to do 401k.
Yeah. And to go a little deeper into one specific real estate strategy, just talking about like potential returns, everybody knows the BRRRR method in the real estate realm. But the BRRRR method is basically a way to get you an infinite return potentially. I did do it on my first investment property. I didn't get all my money back, but essentially what you do is you buy a place. It stands for buy, renovate, uh, rent, refinance, repeat. So I think you got the BRRRR book right there by David Green.
Yeah, this
I'm
book
pretty
is
sure you got me
phenomenal.
that for Christmas or something one year.
It was probably a hand me down. It was probably my old book.
Yeah. Um, but I mean, it's a great book and it's a really good strategy, especially if you don't have a lot of money to throw at real estate. But essentially, what you do is you buy a place, you find a place significantly undervalued. And again, this is a lot. It's a lot harder than it than I'm about to talk through it to actually do it, especially in today's market with today's interest rates. But you buy a place significantly undervalued, you renovate it, um, and typically the financing when you buy it initially is going to be either cash, which again for most people getting into real estate is probably not the most feasible thing. But you either buy it cash or like I personally used hard money, which it's a 12-month loan with very high interest rates, but it's basically a renovation loan. So they know that you're either doing it because you're going to flip the property and sell it under a year, or you're going to do this BRRRR strategy, and we'll get into at the end. You're going to pay off that loan essentially. But so you borrow the money. In a lot of cases, they'll require hard money requires say 20. I'm even hearing of 10% down now, but you put down, we'll say 20%, and then they'll actually fund the entire renovation portion too. You renovate it, okay? You rent it out, then you refinance the property, and because you got it for a good deal and you did renovations to it, it's now worth significantly more than you bought it for. Then you go ahead and refinance. And a refinance basically will pay off that hard money loan, and then you get to keep whatever's left over. And the idea is you keep all of the money that you put into it. Now you have this cash flowing rental with all the four benefits that we talked about. But if everything went perfect, you would actually basically get all of your money back. So you technically put $0 into the deal. Even if you make $1 a month, that's an infinite return. Now, it was a lot of work and a lot of time, but the point is any amount of money on $0 is an infinite return. And this is very hypothetical. Again, I've noticed it's very difficult to get 100% of your money back. I got about half on my first deal. I was very happy with that, just being my first deal. But to kind of let's do an example with some numbers.
Yeah, I think numbers are a little bit easier to follow.
Yeah, and I have the idea to put it on the screen, but I don't know if I'm gonna. My editing skills aren't the best yet.
Yeah,
But
we need to put a whiteboard in the back there, and let you do it because you're
yeah,
you're much better with the numbers than I am.
yeah. So let's just use very basic numbers. Okay, you buy a property for $50,000, and you know that after you fix it up, it's worth 100. So
Hmm.
you need to know what it's going to be worth when it's fixed up, right? And that's where like a good realtor can come in, or if you've just been um, looking at deals in your area for a long time, that stuff will start to come naturally to you. So you know it's worth 100, you buy it for 50, and you put, let's say, $30,000 into it. So you're all in for $80,000. When you refinance, it gets appraised, right? The bank that refinances sends out an appraiser. They come back, they say, okay, it's worth $100,000. Typically, for investment properties, when you do a refinance, they make you leave in 80 or yeah, sorry, 80 or 75%. So it's loan to value LTV 20 or 25%. When I first started listening to podcasts, I only ever heard people say 20%. And then when I
Yeah.
did it myself, I could only find a bank that would do
Fine.
25 at the lowest. So,
Yep.
um, but we'll use 20% for this example. So you have to leave in 20% of the appraised value. So they're going to say, here's $80,000. You have to leave in 20% equity. So you leave in 20 grand. They give you 80 grand. Oh, look, you spent 80 grand on the purchase price and the renovation that you owe that hard money lender. Or if you paid cash, you just pay off you just get that 80 grand back. So when all said and done, you got all your money back essentially. And that's kind of one of the
And then you can
powerful
rinse and
things.
repeat. That's the last step is repeat. So you
Yeah.
just did it once, and then you go and you repeat that process. And next thing you know, if you keep doing one of those a year, you're recycling your money, and now you're taking that money and getting an infinite return, and basically getting 5 properties. And then I think one of his strategies is once you have 5, you can potentially sell the first one and get extra money, and then do this process 2 or 3 times in one year, and then just keep growing. So the BRRRR strategy is definitely a phenomenal strategy in real estate investing. We'll probably do a even further deep dive in another episode to come about it.
Yeah, definitely. It's a strategy that I've always been very interested in, but again, it is a lot harder than it seems. Like all these podcasts make it seem. I remember when I was listening to podcasts, I thought that when I got my first chunk of money that I could buy my first burr with, I was gonna do it one time, get all my money back, and I was just gonna repeat that thing 100 times in like 2 years and just be set. And I mean, the hardest part is finding that deal, right? And especially in today's market, it's tough. Um,
Yeah. One additional reason that real estate is so powerful, kind of moving on, is just that you need somewhere to live, and I think that's like my biggest argument and like the number one reason that I got into real estate. Like, I'm not as frugal anymore, or maybe as most people, specifically Tyler, might be much more frugal than I am. I got a buddy AJ that's significantly more frugal than anybody I've ever met, but I hated spending money on things that I felt like I didn't need to spend money on. And one of those was rent. I've never lived in an apartment complex. I've never ever wanted to. Just strictly, I'm not going to lie, some of the amenities are pretty cool. My dad just moved into one. He's got like a sauna and a gym and like a pool and like all these cool things. And I'm like, that's sick. But you're paying what, like $2,000 a month to live in that? I just could not spend $2,000 a month on anything unless if it was like benefiting me in some way. And so because you need a place to live, and if you're going to be in that area for X amount of time, and the way they have like the FHA loans and 3.5 to 5% down, that's like, in my opinion, the number one thing that almost anybody should do is house hack. Just buy a house, rent out some bedrooms, or buy a house and buy a duplex, which is 2 units, and rent out the other side. Something along those lines. I mean, that is like you need a place to live, and so why waste money living in an apartment complex or something like that when you can save that $2,000, buy a house, and you're paying 1,500, or towards a mortgage or something like that. So it can be cheaper in some avenues too. I know in today's society it might be a little bit more expensive, and that's why you gotta utilize like buying a duplex or a multi-unit property.
yeah, and I think there is this debate whether buying whether your primary residence, the house that you live in, is an investment, I think Grant Cardone, who's like one of the biggest real estate guys in America, he has, I don't know, a couple $1 billion worth of real estate. He swears that it's not an investment at all. And like it's not a wealth building tool because you have to live there. I think me and Tommy both disagree on that. We both kind of look at it as an investment. Going back to Dave Ramsey that we talked about last week, I think in his book he talks about that most millionaires in America get, and we kind of said this stat at the beginning that most millionaires, 90% get it through real estate. But Dave Ramsey's point is that most millionaires that they've studied get their wealth through just buying their own primary residence, and then in 30 years it's paid off, and that's like a large chunk of their net worth.
Exactly. So even if you just did that alone, I mean, most houses, if you buy them today, like something else we didn't really bring up earlier was inflation, and again, that 4% of that property's value going up. If you have a high peak of inflation like we did in 2020, that's why some people saw 10 to 15% return on some of their real estate values and real estate portfolios as well. So even if you just bought that first property and you were living there, and like you said, Ty, did nothing else, um, that property could be worth, if you bought it for 2 to 250 in 30 years, could be worth what, almost $400,000, and it's completely paid off. So you're almost up to half a million. And like the beautiful thing is it gives you so many other options too. Like if whether you want to stay there for 30 years or not, say if you only stayed there for 5, you've probably gained X amount of equity, and you can now take that and move into another primary residence if you want to sell it. You can do a home equity line of credit and try to pull some of the equity and do BRRRRs with the equity from your primary residence. You can, if you have enough money saved up, you can just put 5% down and move into a new house and keep the old house as a rental and then get extra rental income. So there's so many options that getting one property, even if it's just your primary to get started with, and then like having that goal of it being an investment property when you move out, if you want to be more strategic, but just owning a house is going to, it's almost like a forced savings account. Like in today's society with everything being more expensive and all the chickens dying and the eggs going up to like $20 a freaking carton of eggs, like things are expensive. So if you can have a forced savings account as being your home that you bought for 200 and you're slowly paying it down, even if it takes you 5 years, I mean, time's going to keep flying by, but your house could be a forced savings account that'll just give you options to move into a bigger home if your family expands, or there's a lot of
Right.
value to owning a property.
And you're paying, you have, if you rent, you have to pay that monthly payment anyway, right? And
Yeah.
on top of that, on average, this doesn't include maintenance and like capital expenses like a new roof, but on average, your payment is going to be cheaper buying a property versus renting. And the proof there is that renting real estate is a huge business, right? So if it was more expensive to own than to rent, nobody would buy real estate to rent out because they would just be losing money every month. There are examples, of course, today where it is more expensive to buy, and that's a different conversation. But yeah,
And one
it's like
last
you
thing I
have.
just wanted to say about inflation, and this is again the guy who wrote this book, David Green. Him and Brandon Turner had like the best real estate podcast ever, called the Bigger Pockets podcast. They've since they're no longer on the show, but they really got Ty and I into investing in real estate. And one of my favorite points that they make in just talking about buy and hold investors, if you bought that property today, and let's say it's a duplex and you're renting it out and it's $2,000 a month you're getting, and you do nothing for 30 years but just keep it, again, you're going to see the forced equity, right? The property's going to go from $200,000 to $400,000 over 30 years. But also think about the rent payments. I mean, rent 30 years ago might have been $500 a month, and now it's $2,000 a month. But say your mortgage is only, we'll say it's 1,500 because I'm just making up numbers at this point. Your mortgage is always going to be $1,500 a month, and now that rent that was 2 grand, where you're making that 500 in cash flow, in 20 years, that rent's not going to be 2 grand anymore. It's probably going to be four, just because the way inflation works and things just always naturally rise up. So you have a $1,500 payment and you're going to keep getting an extra $100 a month, or basically per year. Your rent's going to keep going up till the point you're getting $4,000 a month in rent, and you still only have that $1,500 mortgage. And that's why so many people own properties that we used to get 500 and now they're getting $2,000 a month in rent, and they're like, holy shit, I'm never selling this property.
Yeah, that's exactly why we hit on the fact that it is a long-term play. Again, I see all these like people on social media that are like, "Oh, I just bought this Airbnb and quit my job after a year." And I think a lot of the people that have these killer deals, it's because they bought them 10 to 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know if people have heard, but like for example, BlackRock's paying for all these properties like way over market value, and they're a huge investment fund. And you're like, why would they pay for something? Why would they pay more than it's worth? And the answer is because in 20 years, the money that it's worth in 20 years is going to be worth significantly more than what they paid for it. So they don't really care if they're losing, say, $20,000 this year. Real estate, the longer you hold, the better everything gets, right? Like Tommy mentioned early on that the way that a mortgage works is you start out paying a lot of principal, or sorry, interest at the first year. As you pay it longer, the payment towards principal starts to go up and the interest starts to go down. So on year 30, you're almost paying all principal. And again, rent went up. Your payment stayed the same. But yeah, so I think another reason that me and you love real estate is just the fact that we love real estate. And it's this might not be true for everybody, but I think it's something that me and you are like truly passionate about. And I don't know about you, but for me, it was in terms of like creating a business, it was the first thing that I was actually like, wow, like this is what I want to do. Again, I don't have any like interest in selling a product or an app or what have you. This was like really the first thing in my life that seemed attainable, and that we just love talking about. That like the biggest reason we started this podcast is because we talk about it so much, because it's just what we like to do. And I think that's just a huge pro if you actually enjoy it. Is what do they say? If you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And honestly, whenever I do anything real estate related, it does not feel like work at all. Like at all. I get like
Yeah.
super excited to go see properties and like walk through them. It's kind of at the point where that's all I ever want to talk about with people. Like I just heard somebody last night on our like networking call, is that like no matter who they're talking to, they find a way to like end up talking about real estate.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. If Ty had $1 for every time I told him I went on a plane and I started talking to somebody about real estate, Ty would have a lot of dollars because that's very often I'm always bringing up real estate in almost every conversation. It's fun. I like it. I mean, there's so much to talk about in this world, especially in such a distracted society, which I think is why Ty and I tried staying off of social media for a while, to avoid distractions. And then you think about real estate, like there's not much better things. Again, we're biased because we think it's fun and we enjoy it, but from like a financial literacy and trying to grow your wealth, like there's not many better things to really be talking about than real estate.
Other than the Eagles.
Yeah, I mean the Eagles are a lot of fun to talk about, but anything in sports almost feels like a wasted breath. Like it's fun. I'm very passionate about sports, but you're never going to convince somebody that Jalen Hurts is the best quarterback in the league, or you're never going to convince somebody that Saquon Barkley is the best running back ever. Everybody's going to have a different point of view, different opinion, and it's a fun conversation, a fun debate. But at the end of the day, there's no reward from that. Where if you're talking about real estate and you convince somebody, hey, you should buy your first property compared to like living in an apartment complex. And again, no disrespect. I know everybody's in different situations and like a lot of things it takes a while to click. But if you can convince somebody to move out of an apartment and buy their first house, I mean, you're setting their life up for a significantly different trajectory, And so to me, that's like the most important conversation that you could ever have with somebody. And I think that's why I like talking about real estate. I love helping people. And my goal is to try and be a good landlord, fix problems before they happen, make sure everybody's got a safe place to live. and then try to help everybody else become very wealthy in life and retire at an earlier age than they thought possible.
Yeah, there's a joke that I always have with Tommy is he everybody that he meets, he's like, "Hi, my name is Tommy. You should buy a duplex and live in one side and rent out the other." So it's just like all he talks about, which is funny
I'm
because
not wrong. I'm not
neither
wrong.
of us, yeah, neither of us personally did that. Actually, I did want to touch on the house hack thing. I know we're going backwards to our last point, but you kind of mentioned house hacking. But basically, for people that don't know what that is, it is probably the most singularly powerful method to get into real estate. Like for new time investors essentially, or people that don't have a ton of money. And essentially what that means is you buy a place with an FHA or a conventional loan. FHA would be 3.5% down. Conventional, you could do 5. And those are like government backed fund mortgages, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. And part of the laws say that you can buy a place to live in that's up to 4 units. So we'll take 4 for example. You can buy a 4-unit property, which sounds crazy to people to own a 4-unit, right? Like again, when you're little or whatever, and you don't know much about real estate, you see people that have a 4-unit property, and you're just like, wow, that's insane. Like, but you can buy that for 3.5% down and live in one. You have to live there. Obviously, you have to live there. I believe it's just for a year. That's like the owner occupancy rules. But then you rent out the other 3 units, and if you do that, you're essentially either going to be living there for free or you're going to be making money every single month. So imagine instead of paying your rent right now, you buy a 4-unit property, and now let's say your rent was 1,000. Now you don't have to pay that 1,000 because the cash flow from the other 3 units um, is paying off the entire mortgage. Now you have $1,000 extra dollars per month to either, if you want to grow, put it towards real estate, or if you want to have fun, just whatever, do whatever you want with it. But
Or,
it's but
or
it's
or be smarter and like pay off some of your debts, set yourself up for a better financial picture, and then like you said, you live there for 1 year, then you move out and you repeat it. If people did that for 2 to 3 years, and you could have 12 units in 3 years, I mean, they'd be set up for retirement or a different lifestyle, or be able to leave their W-2 within like probably 5 years if they stuck with that strategy. I know there's a lot of family aspects. This so like one thing that's I think killing the market right now is like if you live in a house today that's a 4 bedroom, you're probably not going to downsize to a 3 or a 2. So in this scenario, it's maybe for people that are younger, just getting started. Like if you're going to live in an apartment complex, why not own the apartment complex or the 4 unit? And there's a lot of cool ways to do it too. Like you can do it with the 203K loan, I believe, that Ty and I were just learning a little bit about. And say if you buy a crappier place, or it needs some renovations, it's a little bit undervalued, it doesn't look great, you can buy it with the intention with the 203K loan to completely repair all 4 units. And then you can rent it out that way, and you're kind of forcing appreciation. You can get higher rent now that the place has been renovated. And again, you live there for 1 year, then you move out and you have this beautiful, completely renovated, 4 unit.
yeah. So the 203K, essentially, you put down 3.5%. But the mortgage will actually fund the renovations. So it's 3.5% of the total money that you borrow. So if you buy a 4-unit for 300,000 and it needs $100,000 worth of renovations, obviously most people can't afford the renovations. The 203K loan is really powerful because you can put down 3.5% and then wrap that $100,000 renovations into your mortgage. So you'll pay for it over 30 years, but you would only have to put down 3.5% on the total money that you borrowed. So it's definitely a really powerful strategy. Um,
Yeah, but so just to kind of recap here, I mean, all of our key points that we've mentioned, and we've mentioned it some, but you have cash flow, you have appreciation, you have loan pay down, you have tax benefits. There's obviously the differences between the 401k versus investing in real estate. And my timeline for me is like instead of 29 years, I want to try and reach some sort of retirement in 15 years. So almost cutting down, my retirement window in half. Um, I think those are a lot of the key points that we touched on. Like the BRRRR strategy is a great strategy. We touched on house hacking. So ultimately, there's a lot of ways and different varieties to invest in real estate. All we're trying to do is encourage anybody that's listening to like consider how you can put real estate in your own wealth building strategy. Whatever you're doing today, even if you're not thinking about it, I think that's another great point in real estate is like even if you don't want to think about investing, just buy a house and then set it and forget it. And then you'll have options in 5 to 10 years when you want to, sit down and reevaluate. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, so basically the next couple episodes, we're basically going to do deep dives into our own properties, probably one or two or three properties per episode, but we're gonna basically go over the story of how we found them, and essentially all the numbers and kind of what strategy we've used. Like we've mentioned the BRRRR strategy. We've bought primary residences. We've bought seller financing. And next week we are gonna start out with the first property. Well, it's the only property that me and Tommy own together. It's not either of our first properties, but we thought that would be a good introduction to like really deep diving into a deal since it's the only one that we own together. So it'll be really, really informational on particularly seller financing because that's how we got it.
Yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. You've enjoyed listening. And if you have, please like, comment, subscribe. We're going to be on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts to start. So please give us a like and thanks for tuning in to the Monopoly Mindset episode 2.
See you later.